All right, everybody. 203, welcome, welcome. Folks will continue to trickle in, but we can get going. I'm very excited for today. We've got Mike Howard joining us for today's webinar, today's Beekly, and we're going to get into a lot of work around sustainability reporting and communications. Mike is one of the OGs in sustainability. He wrote for GreenBiz for 10 years. He's worked in communications and sustainability for companies like Mars, Cloudera, Berry. I known you for 2 or 3 years or so. You're writing a book, you have a podcast. You hosted maybe the best panel at GreenBiz, or at
Oh,
least the one with like the bluntest questions, which is always the best one. So we're gonna try to hit you back with blunt questions. As a reminder for everybody, the chat is open, the Q&A is open. You're welcome to chat and Q&A whenever you like, and drop that stuff in there. We'll also pause throughout for questions. But Mike, what I want to start is a fairly blunt question,
sure.
which is, what is the point of a sustainability report today? What if I didn't write one? Like, why do I need to write one?
Well, first thing, thank you for the kind introduction. I'll say I'm definitely not an OG. I'm like this like if you look at the history of sustainability, I'm the fact that I'm considered an OG is actually kind of funny because there's a whole other generation of people that like I look up to who are probably later in their career now. I consider them the OGs, but it's something I actually
You're a
tell.
relative
Well,
OG.
it's funny because I tell people that I do these kind of calls once every couple months to give career advice to people, and I tell people one of the cool things about working in this space is that you can be an expert within like if you work in the space for like a decade, you're kind of an expert, or not even a decade. You can get up to speed really fast because things are changing so quickly, and this kind of goes to your question that things are just they're constantly changing and adapting that if you were doing this work 20 years ago it'd be very different than what it is today, which having that experience is still important, but I would say you can kind of get into it pretty quickly, and if you're a quick learner and you go through a lot of cycles of these reports you can kind of get to expert level pretty fast. um, but yeah, what's the point of a sustainability report? I feel like this is a philosophical question that um, it's often asked, and it kind of comes in cycles. Like so actually there's a chapter in my book where I'm talking about like 2020. I'm calling it like the ESG golden age. So like 2020 hit, and BlackRock CEO letter came out, and that really kind of spurred everybody to. And for those who aren't, I mean, I think everyone here is probably familiar with that. But basically, Larry Fink puts out a letter every year to CEOs, and because BlackRock's huge, they most investors listen to what he has to say. And so, he put out for the first time a message that basically was equating climate risk with investor financial risk, and that was a game changer. And at the time, I was at an agency fielding some of our client calls and new business calls, and we were just getting constantly hit up by companies that were like, "My board says we need a sustainability report. Can you help us?" And usually I would ask them, I'd be like, "All right, well, what have you done?" And most of them had done very little. And so, we would say, okay, well, like, what do you have to report on? And so basically, would say, go back to the beginning, have a strategy, then we can help you report. But to go back to the original question, I think there's a couple reasons. I mean, first and foremost, it's to engage your investors. Like, regardless of what's happening in the regulatory environment, investors are demanding this non-financial information now. Like, it's pretty like I think it's something I think I wrote this down. It's like now it's like pretty much I think it's up to 98.6%. So basically, almost 100% of S&P 500 companies are putting out reports. This is just mainstream stuff now. And then about 87% of Russell 1000, so those mostly mid-cap companies, are putting out reports. So pretty much everybody who's a serious business now is putting out a report. And it's mostly because their investors want to see this. And that's the number one reason. And I would say if you're a company that like wants to be taken seriously, you got to have this. And especially if you're doing business with other businesses, um, like I hear lots of potential clients often reach out to me and they're saying, oh, like a lot of our customers are asking in their RFPs for sustainability information, and we don't really have much to talk about. Sustainability report is a really good place to kind of just have everything in one place and kind of like show your homework, so to speak. And then also, they can be used for other things. I mean, they're often used, and I think you have some questions later on that are I can touch on it there, but you know, they're often used to engage other audiences too, like in employees and consumers, which it's not the best tool for that. But I like to say it's kind of forcing you to put all of the performance metrics that you're doing in one place, and also making sure that you're separating disclosure from communication because they're two different things. So like, like when I'm doing reports with clients, sometimes, I can do disclosures, but half the time my clients are doing disclosures themselves and they're just bringing me on to help more with like, how do we put this all to bring this all together? How do we communicate this effectively? Because disclosures are one piece of it, but you also have to have a narrative around it and really a coherent story to get your message out there.
Yeah, I was reading a past blog post of yours, and you talked about the three C's of effective
Hmm.
communication, sustainability communication. You said compelling, credible, and compliant.
Yep.
Compliant makes sense. Got to follow the rules. Compliance is driving
Yeah.
a lot of the work here, and we can talk about the pros and cons of that.
Yeah.
Credible, obviously. If investors are asking for that, you should never be lying. But certainly, if investors are asking for this, they want
Yeah.
to know what's backing it up. But explain why compelling matters, and I'll tell you what I would push back on, which is 2 years ago, in the golden age, as you call it, there were
Yeah.
sustainability reports coming out that were, more beautiful than the Cat in the Hat. They're like the
Yep.
illustrations were Degas, the
Yep.
writing was J.K. Rowling. It was the most majestic,
Yep.
beautiful thing, and I think that caused two major problems. The first and maybe biggest one in the short term was that every dollar spent towards communicating was a dollar not spent towards action. And those were expensive dollars. You were getting good writers, smart people, certainly, pre-generative AI, but even now,
Yep.
um, amazing designers, glossy papers was expensive. But the second problem that came out of that maybe is more of a problem of they lost the balance between compelling and credible, and they went too compelling and not enough credible. But there was so much judge in there about how we're going to save the world by
Yep.
2050, um, that smart people decided they don't believe him, like they don't believe you. So why is compelling important? Why should I not just focus on a one pager that's credible and compliant? Why compelling?
I love this question because I've been thinking a lot about this as I'm writing my book, and I don't think it's a zero sum game like the way you frame it. I don't think it's $1 spent on communication is $1 less spent on action because they're intertwined, right? Like we're dealing with humans here, at least for now. Like if you want, for lack of a better word, if you want shit to get done, you need people to actually do stuff, right? And communication is part of how that happens. And I think we have to separate PR from communication because it's PR is one piece of it, right? Like sending messages externally it would be more PR to kind of improve your reputation. But who's actually implementing sustainability strategies? It's human beings at companies and in your stake and across your value chain, right? You have your partners that you need to involve. You need to have a communication strategy around that as well. And I think I agree with you in the sense that yeah, some reports got out of hand where they got too kind of fluffy. And that's not necessarily the most effective use of money. And I'd even say like you can find a more streamlined way to create your reports and then use other dollars for more effective communication in other areas. Like instead of spending 6 months out of the year putting a report together that few people read, maybe you do a more streamlined report and then use kind of that extra time and money for more effective communication that's more targeted, right? And it all depends. Every company's different based off what audience they're trying to hit. But for some actually, like customers are super important, consumers are super important, so they have to find ways. Like I've worked with like Mars, for example, they're a consumer focused brand, so they spend a lot of time and resources trying to get their sustainability messaging out to consumers because that's actually a business driver for them. And so I think we need to get away from this mentality of like it's either you spend money on getting shit done or talking about it because they're intertwined. But that's the common challenge I think even in marketing in general, like marketing across all companies, it's you always have to prove like why you exist because it's hard to say, right? Like we spent $1,000 on this activation. Oh, that's a low amount. We spent $100,000 on this activation. How did that lead to revenue growth? Like you can't always make a direct line, and that's true of any marketing comms function, not just sustainability. And then I think sustainability is even harder, where you're like, okay, like if we did nothing, if we did said nothing about this and only focused on doing quote unquote doing the work, would it have had a better outcome? It's kind of hard to test that out, right? But to your point, I think there's a balance of sometimes companies get ahead of themselves where they're like, and this is where you get into greenwashing territory where you're kind of getting overeager and you're going too big on the external communication when you don't have enough to really talk about. But I think if you can embed communication and storytelling with your sustainability strategy, then it'll be a lot more natural of like, okay, like this is what we're doing, this is how we're talking about it, and this is how we're getting the messages out there.
Yeah. Do you think compliance has been a net positive or a net negative if the goal is, let's talk about sustainability
Yeah.
purely in terms of like climate. So we're not going to touch social or anything like
Mhm.
that, like in terms of climate. If the goal is prevent the worst outcomes of climate change in as short time frame as possible. Do you think compliance has been a net positive towards that goal and net negative? And I'll give you everyone's very excited about compliance. It's why most of us have a
Yeah.
job still. But I'll
Yeah.
give you the net negative because we should all be very aware of it, which
Yeah.
is all of a sudden the business case, which is really important, obviously,
Yeah.
is no longer look how reducing our emissions can save us money or look how it excites young people. The business
Yeah.
case is there's a law, we got to follow it. And the
Yeah.
good part of that is we all have jobs. How wonderful. I have a whole
Yeah.
company that does that.
Yeah.
The bad case is now there is a bar and a threshold, and you don't want to go too far above the bar because why would you? And you want just enough money to reach the bar, and why do much else? Now, I'm being a little, I'm pushing a little on that side. But what do you think? If the goal, maybe there's a different goal in your mind, but if the goal is save the world from climate change, is compliance been a net positive or a net negative?
Mhm. Yeah. Again, this is an absolute thing. I don't know if you're a Star Wars fan, but it's like only Sith think in absolutes, right?
Just
Um,
call me a Sith Lord. That can't be.
you're a Sith
Not a
Lord
big
of
Star Wars fan,
sustainability.
but I know that can't be a good thing.
Um, yeah, I think feel very strongly about this topic because I spent time in DC grad school, and Paul, I'm very active on kind of the advocacy front as well, and I don't think we should think of in terms of a net negative and where we currently are, right? I think that it hasn't necessarily been the greatest outcomes of like we're forcing everybody to disclose all this information the way that they've done it. But I think the reason why we've resorted to, and when I say we, I mean like people in the policy world trying to get companies to change, we haven't been able to pass like the kind of grandstanding legislation that we need, like a price on carbon and stuff that really moves the needle really fast. And honestly, I mean, look where we are right now. Realistically, that's not gonna happen anytime soon. If we continue to have a democracy, well, we'll see. Um, but I would say like leaders have been trying to pull the levers that they can. So one of them, was the SCC rule that is now dead. That was one way. And then, like in Europe, they're trying to do it another way with CSRD and other things. Because at the end of the day, I think the false narrative that's been kind of touted by a lot of businesses is that, we can do this on our own, we can self-regulate, we let the private sector just volunteer our way out of this. And we're not going to do that. The private sector is not going to do that. Um, and that was kind of the messaging for a while was like, oh, nothing's happening, in Capitol Hill, so it's up to the business to save the world. And that's not gonna happen. Like we know that's not gonna happen. Like businesses at the end of the day exist to make money, and they are they have other obligations to society, but like we can't expect them to do the right thing without some kind of a stick or a bar to clear. And so whether reporting is the best way to do it, I personally don't think that's the best way, but I think it's given that the world's imperfect, like what else are we gonna do? And we need to do something. And so I think, even when I hear companies complain about this, like, oh, we don't have enough resources to both do, decarbonize and do reporting. Yeah, you do. You just choose not to. Like you could find the money, like if you wanted to. Like I know I work with some companies that actually they invest tons of resources into this and they can do both. It's that companies still don't see sustainability as a business driver when they should. And I think I was talking to a CSO yesterday for my book, and I'm not going to say which company, but she said that when they started the program, and she was there when they started it like 15 to 18 years ago. They said we're only going to do this if we're tying it to business metrics, and they're a publicly traded company, so they're like, investors give us $1, they want us to return, do a return on investment for that full dollar, not half the dollar. And so they've so embedded sustainability with their business outcomes that it's like just a no-brainer. And I think this is the challenge for a lot of companies is they still view sustainability as like an extension of corporate philanthropy, or it's like it's still not fully like accepted or understood, even though like it's become, like CEOs have to like they have to say now that they're cool with it. Like I don't think any CEO can like really get out there and say sustainability is stupid. Which actually, honestly, I know there's mostly been negative news lately, but I would say if there was going to be a time when CEOs were going to come out and say we don't like sustainability, right now they have plenty of cover to say that, and they're not really doing that. That being said, I know tons of sustainability professionals where they tell me like behind closed doors, the CEOs think it's bullshit, but like publicly they say it's great. Um, that
Yeah, yeah,
aside, yeah. Anyway, I'm kind of on a tangent
that's
there.
fair. But
Yeah,
what it's like, I'm pushing on the compliance thing.
yeah,
I also think it's a good thing. I started off with a bad thing, but like
yeah,
I wrote this book a year and a
yeah.
half ago or so,
Right, right.
and it's about corporate sustainability. And the first seven chapters are like how you measure emissions, how you reduce, what offsets are, good, bad, whatever. And then the last chapter is about policy. And the first line of that chapter is nothing we talked about in this book matters for climate change
Yep.
except this next chapter, which is how you push policy to
Right.
drive everything forward. So, like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think everyone should be aware of the pros and cons of policy and like what it means to build a business case
Yeah.
around it. So, I think like, I attend a lot of webinars and talks. And everyone's like, "Hooray, policy to save the day! This is all good. See, it's proof."
Yeah.
I don't think it's proof of anything. I think it's like,
Yeah.
finally, you guys have a business case, but we all need to figure out how to make money on this thing still.
Yeah.
But I think the only way to like solve these issues is through policy. And there'll always be a leader who goes further and a laggard who just pays the fine and whatever. But that's how you go on a mass route. So I've been mostly pushing you on negative topics for the first 15 minutes. I promise you, I agree with you on those things. I just we got to get the good stuff out. I want to talk a little bit about where you start with a client.
Yeah.
So, a company calls you tomorrow and says, let's say this is their first report. So they're really
Mhm.
starting from
Yeah.
scratch. Maybe they've measured emissions.
Yep.
Maybe they have a good hiring practices. They were lead offices, whatever. They've been doing some stuff for a couple years. No more plastic cups. Um, they say, Mike, we got to organize all this into a cohesive story. What's your process like?
Yeah. And that's a very common occurrence. So like I'm working with a couple clients right now on putting their first report out. It's honestly it's the same process whether they're at the beginning of their journey or further along. Because I work with companies that are further along as well. And like I've worked with companies recently that their sustainability program is actually super sophisticated, but their reporting was lagging. And so you can kind of think of it like this, right? Like there's like a spectrum, right? Like if you get ahead of your strategy as a communicator, then you're going to be in greenwashing territory. You're risking making mistakes and getting called out, getting fined, sued, whatever. But there's also plenty of companies that are doing a ton of good stuff, but they just don't talk about it. And sometimes it's not even intentionally. And sometimes it's because they're like the marketing and comms functions and the sustainability functions are so siloed at some of these companies where it's just not, there's just a disconnect where like most sustainability professionals in house I would say they're not being measured on the same metrics as the comms and marketing team are, so they might be like, okay, like I'm going to be evaluated off, oh, do our MSCI ratings going up or down or whatever. And reporting can help that, but reporting is one piece of it, right? And most comms people don't really understand reports, or they're not involved. But increasingly, you're seeing more comms teams involved with the reporting process. But and again, this is also why I'm writing my book, because there's so many companies where the comms people are technically responsible for communicating sustainability, but they're comms generalists, and so they're not in this world. Like I'm kind of the hybrid, right? And there's not that many people that are like me, where we're kind of doing both, where we understand marketing comms function and we understand sustainability. I'm not in the weeds doing all the technical stuff, but I can speak fluently with the technical aspects of it, understand it, interpret it, and translate it. And this is what I think has led to a lot of companies getting in trouble, because a lot of times it's just a lack of like nuance, right? Like they're not trying to greenwash on purpose. Nobody wants to greenwash. I don't think any company has done it intentionally. It's more that they don't realize the stakes that are there, and also like if you're not living and breathing these issues, like you're not going to know. Like like it's tough, right? And I think that's why you're seeing more companies realizing like, dang, it's a lot easier to hire Howard Impact or hire an in-house sustainability comms lead than to just like get sued or fined or whatever. But to go back to the original question, the process is generally, I mean, it's standard. I'd say a lot of consultants do this. This is nothing special, but you really just want to gather as much information as you can. So this is where I think why I liked moving from journalism into this space, because it's very similar, where it's like you're basically trying to understand the problem, understand the situation, gather as much information as you can. So there might be stakeholder interviews, asset review, like reviewing anything they've done, doing a little benchmarking, just to kind of understand like where they are in their journey. Um, and I'd say for the first sustainability report, usually the common path is like, okay, this is your benchmarking year. So, this isn't the year that you're going to be putting out a lot of, very impressive things, but at least you want to talk about, okay, we're putting out we did our first LCA, or we're doing our first,
Mhm.
greenhouse gas inventory. We're kind of really getting a grasp on all the things we're doing across our company, to really set that baseline. And then, yeah, I mean, those reports tend to be usually the more bare bones ones, because there's not a lot to talk about, or sometimes they might have more. But like I said, it's really common to just really capture like, where they are, understand where they are, honest, like in an honest way. And like, I mean, that's, I think, where a lot of my clients like I mean, I wouldn't say blunt, but like I'm going to tell them what I think they need to do. We're not here to make people feel better. Like if they're, and this is why they pay me, because it's much easier for me to tell them this than to get in trouble later, right? Um,
Yes.
and
Yeah. So part of your job is to like consolidate all this information
Yeah,
and then tell them some stuff's not ready for prime time yet. You a little more work to do before you get in trouble for it, and
yeah,
stuff's in
and I haven't
place.
had like lately, and I'm a small shop these days. When I was at bigger agencies, we would have more companies coming to us where like they literally had done nothing, and I'd have to be like, guys, we can't do anything until you have to do something. I think I
Yeah.
haven't had that issue. I mean, I've been doing Howard Pack for 2 years now. I haven't
It's
had
been a
any.
few years. People have kind of
Yeah, like I think
they've
companies.
either done some stuff or
Yeah,
they're not
now
going
it's
to
a
anytime
little bit
soon.
more like I haven't said no to a project because like I thought they were just here to greenwash. Like that hasn't happened in years, which I think is a good sign.
Yeah.
Um,
But I think greenwashing is less popular now, which is a great sign. But actually, I want to touch on
yeah,
folks have asked two very similar questions, one
yeah.
anonymous, one public, but questions very similar, which is I'll read the anonymous one. Does Mike have insight on company leadership shifts or pullback on ESG reporting since the recent attacks on DEI from
Hmm.
slash the new administration? The public
Yeah.
one was very similar. What's changing in the current political landscape? I'll give you my answer super quickly. Because we work with a lot of clients. I've seen definitely pullback in the amount that they're communicating, but not in the amount that they're doing. And so I'll give you a couple of specific examples. I know one company that took every mention of DEI off of their website back in November. In November, their chief legal officer said, "We are
Mhm.
taking DEI off of the website." They removed old impact reports and just took the DEI stuff out of there. I asked about that, and they said they changed the person who was running head of DEI, basically changed their title to add a culture and kept the same amount of budget, kept the work. So a lot of that work continued to happen from there. But I also know clients, and the main work that Beehive works on is SB 261 compliance and publishing your TCFD reports. I know some companies, I was just with one this morning, fairly large law firm that's like semi in the, you've read about them in the news in the last couple of months. Um, they're basically saying, like, we're going to follow the law. Of course, we're going to follow the law, but we're just going to write the fewest number of words possible to follow this law. And
Yeah.
we are not going to say anything about commitments. We are not going to say anything about targets. We're not going to say anything about sophisticated approaches. We're just going to write some stuff that I've seen elsewhere, and I'm sure it'll all be fine. And I agree with you. I'm sure mostly will all be fine, unless you're right, the less there is. So I've seen both of those. What are you seeing, Mike?
Yeah. Well, similarly, yeah, I think at GreenBiz, actually, I was talking to a few companies, and one of them gets like 90% of their revenue from the federal government. So they panicked, of course, and they scrubbed their entire website of actually, they just took down like all their report. This is not a client. This is just somebody I was talking to. Um, and that makes sense because like 90% of your revenue, and this is a company that everyone here has, you probably never heard of them, but everyone engages with them anytime they go through an airport. And to give a little hint there. But but yeah, that made sense. But that being said, they weren't like, we're canning this. They were like, it was kind of like a crisis response, like, okay, let's take this down and then come up with a plan. And I don't know, I was actually going to check in with them probably in June to just see where they're at with that. Um, but then I would say pretty much every company I've worked with this year has removed diversity. Unfortunately, not like they haven't just deleted it completely, but we've rebranded everyone's rebranded it. Um, Not every company's going to, and I think those companies are going to in the long run win out on the credibility front. Um, because what I think a lot of companies are doing right now is that they're prioritizing one stakeholder group, which is regulators, policymakers, or I mean, I like to call them policy breakers now, which is really what is happening. They're not making policy; they're just breaking shit. And they're ignoring all their other stakeholders. Like, this is what's so fascinating and sad is that investors are still demanding this stuff. So like, you can't just stop it. Like, investors still want to know. Like,
I got a call
hmm?
last week. I got a call
Yeah,
last week from a client. This
yeah,
client has zero ESG people, will
yeah,
never hire an ESG person, just doesn't need it. But they were told by investors last year to do CDP for the first time, and like
uh-huh.
everyone doing it for the first time, they got a D on CDP, which is standard. And they called me last week saying they have a European investor who has a limit about how much money they can invest based on your CDP score. So,
Huh.
what is your plan to get your CDP score up this year? And I think that story is just so emblematic. And I have a couple similar ones, but it's just so emblematic of there's many stakeholders at play, and
Mhm.
you should consider the scariest one for sure.
Mhm.
But the loudest one is not always the scariest one. And what I mean is, if you're a
100%.
company who like, especially one who like hasn't fully a
Yeah,
thousand percent leaned in on ESG, you're not the hero of DEI or
yeah,
whatever. There's a company doing a good job. Are the chances that you're going to be come after for publishing this stuff? Yeah, no, I don't
yeah,
know. I don't know if it's that high. Call a lawyer, but like, I don't
yeah,
know if it's that high.
yeah,
But the chances that like an investor who currently owns, making this up,
yeah,
$500 million of your stock is not going to jump to 800 million, which
yeah,
means your price is not going to jump by the 300 basis points it could have. Like that is
yeah,
the scariest thing, even if it's a quiet one. So like, I
yeah,
think your point about who's your most important stakeholder, I'll give you a counter example. Everyone loves to talk about how much employees care about sustainability.
yeah,
Everybody, our employees care. And you've talked a lot about this, that the assumption always 1,000 times over the last couple of years has been that the young generation
I think.
cares about climate, they care about sustainability. Young people, of course, care about climate. But, at least in November, politically, young people shifted very far to the right relative to where they've been
Yeah,
previously. Now, is that because they don't care about climate or something else? I don't know. Maybe they just cared about other issues like economic issues more. But the point is, if you think employees really care about your business, prove that. Prove that. Run some session. I actually know a company who said they've got about 7,000 employees
yeah,
and they're running a session next week for just like teaching people about sustainability. What are we doing for sustainability? Whatever. They expect 100 people to show up. 100 out of 7,000. If you're getting that kind of rate, what is that? 1.3% of your employees to show up for this. I would say that's awesome, and I'm glad for you. But employees are not your loudest or scariest stakeholder. And so you got to figure out they might matter. I'm happy that 100 people are
yeah,
showing up to this training. Maybe they do other stuff. But like, you got to be honest with yourself about who you're serving and stack rank them and then say, this is who matters the most. And if regulators, politicians are the ones who matter the most because it's your competitors or your peers or your
yeah,
industry who's getting attacked and sued. Yeah, like you gotta eat. Take that
yeah,
seriously. You don't want to go to jail or whatever crazy stuff's going. You don't want to be in El
yeah.
Salvador. But like the loudest is not always the scariest.
Yeah. Well, that is very true, and I can definitely attest to that. I think one of my lawyer friends told me one time that generally, when you have nothing to bring to the table, the tactic in law is to slam the table with your fists. Like, generally, if you have a good argument, you you're usually calm about it. You don't. you- But again,
Well said.
what we're dealing with right now is unprecedented in the United history of the United States, and I think um, what a lot, I mean, I'm reading probably too much. I'm doom scrolling like everybody else. But I think where a lot of businesses I think are making a mistake right now is that they're by prioritizing what's in their immediate interest, which might be keep my head down, not don't get called out by administration. It's kind of like the prisoner's dilemma, right? If everybody does that, we all get more fucked over. Whereas imagine it like Harvard is a great first step. Harvard is stepping up. They're the first major university to step up against all this bullshit that the regime's trying to have them do. Imagine if every single company in the US did that as one. Said, F you, we're embracing DEI. Like they couldn't go after everybody S&P 500. And I think that's where I'm feeling the most disappointment with some business leaders right now because I get it. Like your job is to protect your particular company, but thinking bigger than that, like it's almost like they're making the bet that democracy's already done and Trump like. But this is either that's going to happen, in which case none of this matters anyway. But I've kind of led to this. I just watched the Avengers. I rewatched it recently, and there's the scene where my book is going to have lots of analogies with sci-fi because I love sci-fi. Um, but there's a scene where like the aliens invade New York and it's like okay the world's over and one of the characters says like until the Earth stops spinning we're going to act as if it's going to continue spinning on and I think we need to stop like acting like, all right, democracy's done. We're screwed. This is it. I mean, we need to understand the risks involved, but like, we're going to come back from this. Like, if we're either going to come back from this or we're not. If we don't, that's a whole other set of issues that we're going to have to deal with. And I've said this on LinkedIn many times it's in every company's interest to maintain the rule of law because look at Russia, look at any country. I have family in Nicaragua where there's a dictatorship there as well. Like if you're not in with the administration or the regime, like you don't do business. And most unless you're like five companies that Trump likes, like you're not going to be having a good time. And so anyway, long story short, I think that companies need to think about what is important to their business, what are their values, and stick to those values because values only matter when you defend them when times are hard. Times are hard right now on this front. So if the current administration is kind of like a monkey holding like a loaded gun, I think that's why everyone's so terrified because it's not acting rationally. It's just so ideologically driven with no root. Like it's not even conservative. This is like a whole other level of insanity. And this is not even like Republican versus Democrats. Like Democrats and Republicans need to align, like will align on this. And I think most business leaders are like, holy shit, like I need to, in order for me to make plans, I need to have stability. This is not stable. I'm going to get off this political rant and get back to what you're saying. Um, Companies need to really align their strategy with their business and their values and then communicate accordingly. So none of this matters if you're only talking about it when everybody agrees with you. Like that, like standing up for what you believe in when people in
Yeah.
power are threatening you, that is courage. And that is in the long run, that's those companies are going to win out. Like even like Apple's already said, hey, we're sticking to DEI. Like, and I think most of the companies actually that I've talked to recently that are more fully evolved in their sustainability are not really changing much. It's really the ones that were kind of more nascent. Like, and I think this is what we were seeing, right? 2020 hit, so many companies started on their sustainability journeys. They were just getting traction, and then this is happening. So they're still not fully developed, and so they're panicking and go, okay, never mind, and then like running away.
Well, I
Uh,
think you need to. Your line that it's easy to do it if it's the popular thing,
yeah,
but values are only real if they're slightly contrarian. Yeah, there's this
yeah,
investor, if anyone listens to some like 20 VC, this guy Harry Stebbings, when he
yeah,
basically talked about how he pushes back on CEOs sometimes. And he's like reads the CEO, the company's values, and the values are like be kind or you know
yeah,
attention to detail or whatever. And he's like,
yeah,
those aren't values because there's not a trade-off in them. A value implies some sort of trade-off, meaning be kind, yeah, duh, be kind.
yeah,
But like maybe be ruthlessly efficient has a
yeah,
trade-off. That means sometimes you won't be thoughtful. So that's a trade-off. That's okay. Um, in this particular context, the conversation that I've been having a lot is, do you believe that everything you've done over the last, call it 2 to 4 years for most companies, have been based in truth, or were you caught up in a hype cycle? Because
Yep.
the answer is never 100% truth. It is
Yep.
not. There was a hype, like everyone got caught up in the thing.
Hmm.
Um, but which parts of what you were doing were true? And those things are going to be true
Yep.
forever. Like those things have not gone away. So, in Beehive example, one of the reasons I started Beehive is because the thing I wasn't seeing was, everyone talked theoretically climate change is getting worse. Theoretically, these disasters are growing in frequency and severity. Theoretically, heat waves are going to kill us all in the year
Yep.
2050. But nobody was doing a good job of tying that to this quarter. Your company is going to lose money because a wildfire is going to burn down your customer stores, your utilities, and kick a bunch of employees out of their offices. And that is a truth. Wildfire is still going to happen. That will
Yep.
be true this quarter, next quarter, and for the next 100 quarters. In your opinion, Mike, what is one truth, a very tangible, specific truth that companies can assess and then continue to do? Be as specific as you can. And what is something that was part of the hype cycle? And I'll just make it easier
Mhm.
for you. I'll give you the hype cycle part. I think a lot of stuff around carbon offsets were very hype cycle-y.
Yeah.
And I've been talking about this for years. This is not a new,
Yeah.
read the book or like if you've
Yeah.
talked to me 2, 3 years ago, I was like, people trying to be carbon neutral forever at a price of $10 a ton. That is a problem. That is a big problem 1,000 times over. That is going to bite you in the ass. And you see that happening today. So like I don't have a problem with carbon removal or even carbon offsets
Yeah.
generally. I had a problem with cheap carbon offsets, go forward permanent carbon neutrality commitments because nobody knew what that meant. So that is part of what I thought is the hype cycle. And that is something now, if I were doing, I would take a big step back on and say, how do I do that same amount of dollars, but on
Yeah.
higher quality credits and kick carbon neutral out the door? That's the trade off I would make. In your opinion, what is one truth that is definitely should be sticking around in people's strategies and communication? And what is one part that was probably people were a little too caught up in?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the carbon offset because I actually have a thought on that that's related to communication. So, like, Delta Airlines, they were in a lawsuit for making carbon. They were trying to call themselves the first carbon neutral airline, and it's
Mm,
fun. I actually talk about this in my writing for impact class as an example of what not to do now. Um, but it's interesting because like no, today no one would ever make a claim like an absolutist claim like that. But I think that's a great. And again, I didn't work with Delta. I don't. This is just me looking outward at what I think probably happened. My guess is, they were doing this work and they're like, okay, everybody hates, air flying is terrible for the planet. What do we, and how do we turn this around? And I bet you their comms team was like heard this concept of carbon neutrality and from a very base understanding of it was like that would be a great headline. And then I wouldn't be surprised if their sustainability team was like, wait, I don't know if we should do this. Like, it's probably, I bet you there was a lot of these discussions happening. And again, this is me just guessing. I don't know. This is how I imagine it would happen. Um, and then they put it out there, and now look where they are. And I think at the time, the carbon neutrality was like the buzzword going around. Everybody was like, "Let's do it. We want to be carbon neutral, this and that." And I think that's a great example of how. And I talk about this in my book as well. Not to keep this is all I'm working. I'm like living this book right now. So this is all I'm thinking about. I have to have it done by October, so I'm getting married in August, so I'm just like, trying to get this thing out. But how their process of getting there was probably again I'm just guessing here, but like you take this hype thing like okay carbon neutral. I think more recently net zero has been the hype thing, which net zero by 2050, 2030, whatever. It's important. That's I'd say net zero is definitely more credible, but that also has become a hype thing. At least the last 2 years, everyone's like, oh, we're doing net zero this, net zero that. Great, fine. Science-based targets, awesome. Um, I think another example is what we're seeing right now with DEI, right? So, George Floyd gets murdered, COVID hits, all of a sudden, I think I wrote an article in GreenBiz about this that year was the S in the ESG became the hot topic. Like, how are we addressing the S? Everybody knows how to address the E. How do we do the S? And I think at the time, so many, again, you had these probably social media managers that were like, oh, everybody's making a statement about, diversity and racial equality. We got to do it too. And so it probably came from people who are not really sustainability ESG people pushing their teams like, hey, can we put, maybe they didn't even consult their sustainability team. I don't even know. Maybe it's happened where they were just like, oh, we should put out something and say we care about this stuff without really thinking about like, well, what are we do? Do we have a DEI strategy? Do we actually, are we living what we're preaching? I don't think that happened a lot. I think it just became this like, okay, we all have to say, and I remember even happening at a time where it was like silence is complicity. So like if you don't say something, then you hate diversity, which I think is also bullshit. Like I think we need to, and I think this is where I think we're learning a lot of lessons right now. You know, I'm a more, left-leaning guy, but like I think a lot of people sustainability, but it's not, shouldn't be left or right. But like I think we did get to a point where we were getting a little cocky of like our thought is the way that the world's heading, and like you have to agree with us on every social issue that exists, and if you don't, you're evil. And I think what's happening right now in the US is kind of like the reaction to that. And now we're sweet. Now we're like way going the other way, which is also further than I think most people would want. So I think we're going to move back to a more balanced approach, hopefully. But my point is that when you actually explain this stuff, even to people who like DEI has been demonized in certain circles, if you actually explain to them like, hey, do you think it's good to like help veterans get jobs after they serve? Most people will be like, yeah, that's great. Oh, that's a DEI. That's part of a corporate DEI strategy. Do you think it's, when, if a mother takes time off to be with her kids and wants to get back in the workforce and there's programs that help them do that, is that good? Most people are like, yeah, that's great. Like if you explain it the way it actually is, most people are fine with these issues. And this is actually one of the things I talk about. Again, I put this in my book, but there's a lot of my content. I think killing the buzzwords is actually great. I think fine, DEI, kill the buzzword. Like let it die. I don't care. Do the work is still happening. Um, And I think if you're actually doing the work, you can talk about the work and you don't have to use the buzzwords. So I think companies rely on buzzwords for their communication when they're not doing a lot. Because like it's easy to be like, yeah, like I don't know how many times I've had to write these sentences for clients over the past 10 years. Like, oh yeah, we care, we at so and so company, we prioritize an inclusive and diverse environment. Like, okay, but what the heck does that mean? Like, well, let's talk about what you're doing. I'm very passionate about this, as you can tell. That being said, I am also getting really irritated where I'm being directed to like I don't know how many times I've had to rewrite sentences in the last 6 months of like basically remove anything that could be seen as like we're giving preferential treatment, which it's just the reading. I mean, if you want to get into legal terms, I don't want to mess with legalese, but it's like it's kind of ridiculous. It's gotten to the point where it's just so stupid where you can be like, yeah, we care about inclusive environments. Everyone feels like they're welcome, but you can't say diversity because that's evil now. Um,
Yeah.
but there's
Yes.
ways to get around it to explain it in a way that like if you explain it like, hey, like this isn't about quotas. Like this is about realizing that our company does better if we have diverse talent from different backgrounds with different personalities and experiences. And like that's like a fact. Like that's just like true. But I think where we struggle is we live in a world now where facts don't matter to a lot of people and they're very emotionally driven. This is another reason why I think storytelling is so important. This is why like I shouldn't have to write a book on this, but because we already know what we need to do, we don't do it because we're humans. We're not, I mean, at some point, I mean, AI is going to be integrated with our brains. I don't know. But like we are not rational actors. Most of us are not. We are emotionally driven creatures. Like we have all the facts at our disposal and we choose to believe non-facts because it fulfills some other emotional need that we have. And I think that's why storytelling is so powerful because that's what gets us to actually do stuff. You can send all the data to somebody you could have all the facts sent to them, verified. They're not going to do shit if they don't have a story attached to it that makes them feel like they should follow through on it.
Yeah. Um, I just a couple of things as we wrap up
Yeah.
here. Um, I do think storytelling is important, as facetious as I was being in the beginning. I had
Yeah.
a LinkedIn post a couple weeks ago that blew up a little bit, and it was basically I don't know if anyone's seen Aaron Brockovich. It's a
Oh yeah.
two,
Oh
two,
yeah. I remember this post you did.
2000 Julia Rob. I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm on there every single day. I have to think of something new. But there's Aaron Brockovich, Julia Roberts on an
Yeah.
ops report in the year 2000. Long story short, law firm finds out that PG&E is dumping chemicals into a pond and sues them for $300 million. This
Yeah.
is the same PG&E who 20 years later got sued another few $1 billion and went bankrupt because they were complicit in starting a giant wildfire in California. My point is, uh, the post was basically like, we don't need more proof that there's a business case. Like,
Yeah.
voila, here it is. You need a story to understand why that business case matters to me. So I agree with you. Couple quick things. So if anyone's going to be at San Francisco Climate Week next week, or if anyone's colleagues live in San Francisco or be there, Mike and I and a few others are co-hosting a happy hour next Tuesday evening. I just dropped a link for that in the chat. Feel free to send it around to a friend. Actually, I see a few folks on here who will be there. So excited to see you there next week. In 2 weeks, we're going to skip this webinar. Actually, the first Thursday that I'm skipping a webinar. We've done this every single Thursday for like 5 months in a row now. This is the first Thursday
Yeah.
we're skipping because I'll be on a flight. But in 2 Thursdays, we're hosting just a Beehive product deep dive. So it'll be 30-ish minutes of me if you're a current customer of Beehive, or you're just like curious what's going on. Come join us and I'll show you all around the product. It's very open kimono. So I'll drop a link to that in a moment. One question for you from the audience, is from Asheen,
Yeah.
our buddy Asheen at PagerDuty. He asked, "What's the real risk of doing the work but not talking about it?" So taking action but not communicating, like we've been talking about,
Yeah.
particularly if your investors are not concerned about your ratings. Conversely, what is the business value, the real business value of reporting? How would you answer that, Mike? In our last couple minutes, we have time for like one more question, maybe. So if
Yeah.
anyone wants to chime in, feel free.
Oh, that's a really good question. And again, it's not a one size fit all answer. It depends is the answer. It depends on the company and the industry. Like if you're, for example, if you're a company that sells to Amazon, and Amazon's not perfect, but Amazon and all their RFPs requires information on sustainability. They're going to want to have that backed up. Like your salespeople are going to have to be able to prove that you're doing stuff. Some companies, I mean, I'll be honest with you, maybe there's probably some companies where it really doesn't make sense to go big on that, and maybe do the bare minimum. Um, I don't think every single company, like not every company needs a CSO, for example. Like not every company is at the size or scale where they need that. Um, Not every company needs to put out a 100-page sustainability report. That's definitely not true. But I would say you got to have something because, like, like we were saying, like I don't know any. I mean, any young person. I don't know. I'm not even young. It's funny because like when I started this, it was like I'm an older millennial, but like now we're kind of like the not the youngest people anymore. Now it's all Gen Xers, Gen Z, sorry, Gen Zers. Um, if you have nothing about your values or anything anywhere in your communication, that's probably going to be a red flag to a lot of people that want to work for companies that have some kind of compass. Um, I would say if your investors aren't asking, I mean, again, it depends on the company. Like maybe they're not asking now, but they might ask later. So might as well get ahead of it. Um, because climate is it's just gonna get worse and worse and worse. Like it's not gonna get better unless we act. And the way the world's heading, it's probably gonna just keep getting worse. And so whether you're only focused on the E or the S, like again, and this is another thing I talk to clients too. It's like not every company needs to be making grandstanding about DEI issues. Like maybe that's not your most material issue. Go through a materiality assessment, determine what are your actual important issues that are tied to your financial performance. Um, and so I think that's where a lot of companies also have made mistakes is that they want to do everything. They want to talk about every issue. Like have a material, have your strategy needs to be focused on the things that are actually moving the needle for your business. There are too many issues in the world for you to be able to address every single one of them. So it's the same reason why you would do a materiality assessment for your strategy. Like you should actually just start to come up with this concept of a sustainability storytelling assessment, which is similar, where it's like assess all the stories and issues that actually matter to your business, and then those are the things that you should talk about. And you should do the work proactively because I think right now companies are just being reactive to everything, and everything's a crisis mode. And you know, I worked at Edelman many years back, and actually my team, so we were kind of like I think we were calling ourselves, we were business and social purpose back then. But it's basically like we were like the sustainability comms team, and then there was a crisis comms team that sat literally right next to us, and we were like the same side of or two sides of the same coin. So like the more you kind of invested in the sustainability proactive comms, the less crisis stuff you'd have to deal with on a lot of these topics. So if you think about that way, like kind of doing your homework now, really thinking about like what's important to talk about, what's not, what are your tactics for getting that message out there? Yeah, maybe you don't need to put like I don't think any company should get away would not put any reporting out. Like I said, most of them are already doing it. But you might be able to get that information out there in a more kind of a more optimized way. Like I know for a couple years there was a big movement of like let's get rid of PDFs and move to like a ESG hub. And I remember at my last company, we were trying to push that, but that actually ended up being so much actually more work that companies didn't want to do it that way. Or it was like, maybe that'll be the long-term trend, but there's like a lot of technical issues at companies where it's like, even their websites are like, you'd be amazed at how crappy a lot of these big corporations' websites are. So even just
Yeah,
like
they're
doing
really
that,
rough. Yeah.
yeah, like even being like, hey, let's create like an ESG data hub, like that could be so much work that they're like, let's not even bother. And then a lot of the ratings agencies actually want the PDF anyway, so it's kind of go back and forth. But I imagine, it's kind of like right now, there's like people are like go back to work, go to the office. The long-term trend is we're going to be working virtually. It might be take a couple decades to really solidify. Long term, you're going to have AI probably generating a lot of your ESG content. Like I don't expect to be writing ESG reports in 10 years. Like I don't like it's AI is already helping with a lot of things that I was doing. Luckily, writing is not the main thing I do. It's mostly the strategy. But AI is going to, I think, optimize a lot of this stuff, but I don't think it's going to necessarily remove the need for like thoughtful humans to actually put this into context and do all that. So I
Yeah.
don't know if that answered the
Um,
question at all. I guess my answer is it depends, but that's like always the answer in
that's
sustainability.
always the answer. That's always the truth. It depends,
Yeah,
and yeah, your job is to figure out which one to do. That's what all of our jobs
yeah,
are. Is like be a smart, thoughtful person if it depends, and be
yeah.
honest, intellectually honest, and don't do stuff that's a waste of everyone's time, and do stuff that matters. One final question. It's a
Yeah,
really thoughtfully phrased question. I'll read it verbatim.
yeah, yeah.
What is your current favorite sustainability book besides Adriel's? Everybody should go buy Attainable Sustainability. I do think it was a pretty
Um,
good book. And I think, by the way, for what it's worth, I think 18 months old, but it holds up pretty well. I still agree with most of everything
so
I ranted about here. It was in there 18 months ago.
I mean, I've read a lot. I have a lot of books on my shelf right now that I'm trying to get through. But if you're looking for a climate communication book, this book is my favorite one that's ever been written. Don't Even Think About It by George Marshall. Came out like almost 10 years ago, but it's super relevant still. And I'm actually taking a lot of inspiration for this, applying it to my book I'm writing. Because he goes into a lot of like the psychology and the sociology about like why don't we act when we know we need to act? And it's a pretty fascinating read that I actually think everyone should read this book. I'm going to be citing some pieces in this in my book as well. Um, and then on that note, since I'm just going to promote my own book, next May, sustainability storytelling, translating stories or strategy into effective stories is coming out. So that's going to be really aimed at anybody who wants to just like do a better job communicating sustainability in a business context. So I'm kind of just taking all the knowledge that I have and I'm interviewing tons of CSOs and other sustainability comms people I want it to be kind of like the compendium for that. So this could be hopefully they're going to teach it in business schools, like, and it's more, I'd say it'd be more targeted for mid-level professionals, like, but it could be a good review for more senior people too. Because there hasn't really been a book yet written that's practical on this topic, and so that's kind of why I'm putting that out there.
Yeah, beautiful. I'd always recommend Speed and Scale by John Doerr. John Doerr is a famous
Oh
venture
yeah,
capitalist. He's a partner, maybe the founder or something of Sequoia Capital, invested in Google, and has been
oh
doing
yeah,
a ton of climate
yeah.
work. He gave $1 billion to Stanford for a climate school, and maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, he published Speed and Scale, which is a very aggressive plan to curb emissions, and it's very ambitious, and there's a lot of good work in there. But many other good ones. Beautiful. Well, hey, thank you very much, Mike, for joining us. You guys can all find Mike at powerimpact.com or on LinkedIn. Thank you, everybody. I hope to see you in San Francisco Climate Week if you're there, or in 2 weeks for the Beehive product training. Besides, Mike, thank you very much, and see you all soon.
Thanks for having me. Thanks everybody.
Bye.